14 days. That was the number stamped into the consciousness of a nation. The echo that shook markets, mosques, universities, and parliaments across Africa. 14 days in which the United Nations, draped in the language of peacekeeping and global order, had declared that Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, must either surrender his office or face arrest. A decision that reverberated across continents like the drumbeat of an ancient war cry. And yet within the marble halls of New York, where the resolution was passed, it was framed as a simple matter of stability. As though stripping a leader of his people's trust could be equated with preserving international peace. But outside those polished chambers, the story felt far more sinister. In Ouagadougou, the announcement was received not as diplomacy, but as a colonial ultimatum. The latest chapter in a script Africans knew too well. The script where rising leaders are painted as threats the moment they speak too loudly of sovereignty. Where independence is tolerated only when it is quiet, submissive and easily bent, the moment Traoré's defiance grew visible. The machinery of international order began to whir against him. But the people did not react with resignation. They reacted with fire, with disbelief, with defiance of their own. Mothers stirring porridge froze in silence as radios delivered the news. Their hands trembling, but their eyes burning with recognition. Taxi drivers rolled down their windows to shout the latest updates through traffic. University students huddled shoulder to shoulder, staring at glowing phone screens, where hashtags like #StandWithTRA are acute, and #AfricaResists trended within hours. And by sunset of the first day, the ultimatum had already transformed into a global countdown. A 14-day theater, where the world would witness whether an African nation could resist the weight of centuries pressing against its spine. Yet the man at the center of it all, the young captain turned president, stood firm in front of the cameras, his camouflage uniform pressed, his red beret perched with the certainty of conviction. And when he spoke, the words seemed less like political rhetoric and more like iron chiseled into history. If defending Africa's dignity makes me a criminal, then let them come, but let the world know Africa will never be arrested. A sentence that exploded across languages, translated into French, English, Arabic, Swahili, bouncing from screen to screen, erupting in Paris, in London, in New York, where members of the diaspora poured into streets waving flags, chanting his name, holding banners that read, "We will not kneel." And in that moment Traoré was no longer merely Burkina Faso's president. He had become a symbol stitched into the same fabric as Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, Nelson Mandela. Leaders who carried the continent's dignity until their enemies silenced them. But this time was different, or so the people believed. Because Traoré had studied the script, he had memorized the tragedies of history, and he had chosen not to run from them but to wield them. In his speeches, he invoked the ghosts of Africa's unfinished revolutions, reminding his people that Sankara was assassinated, but not forgotten, that Gaddafi's dream of an African currency was bombed into the desert, yet still whispered in the halls of universities, that Mandela's prison cell was supposed to silence him, but instead birthed freedom itself. And when Traoré declared, "They killed Sankara, but not the idea of African dignity," they bombed Gaddafi. But the dream of a united Africa still lives. They jailed Mandela, but freedom walked free. If they threaten me today, it is not because I am powerful. It is because I dare to remember. His people roared in unison. From the slums to the markets to the halls of power, murals of his face appeared overnight, painted next to Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah, and on campus walls students scrawled slogans like, "Heroes don't kneel," while rappers in Bamako recorded tracks declaring him the heir of Africa's unfinished revolution. TikTok videos remixed his speeches with beats that pulsed through headphones from Johannesburg to Lagos. And each retweet, each chant, each mural added another brick to the fortress of solidarity surrounding him. Yet for every burst of celebration, there were shadows moving silently. Whispers of sanctions drafted in Brussels and Washington. Encrypted cables between intelligence agencies predicting collapse if he did not comply. Chatter about mercenaries massing at the borders of Niger. Satellite images revealing foreign drones circling over Sahel skies. Disinformation campaigns already seeded online. Fake stories about hidden bank accounts. False videos depicting his supposed surrender. The ultimatum was not just political. It was psychological. It was economic. It was military. An entire symphony of pressure playing at once, but Traoré seemed unfazed. In a midnight broadcast, his voice lowered but sharpened like a blade. He asked, "They threaten me with arrest. But who will they send? Blue helmets, foreign armies. Do they forget this is African soil? If they step here, they will not find one man but millions standing in defense of freedom." Words that triggered a storm of responses. In Mali and Niger, leaders declared openly that to touch Traoré would mean to touch them as well. In Senegal, thousands marched outside UN offices. In South Africa, activists compared his ultimatum to the imprisonment of Mandela. While in Paris, the diaspora lit candles and sang freedom songs. The ultimatum intended to isolate him instead transformed him into a continental beacon. Yet as the second day ended, the unease deepened, because the more he defied, the more his enemies sharpened their knives. Rumors spread of infiltrators within his government, whispers of assassination squads, anonymous radio voices warning of sabotage, and still he remained steady, telling his advisors who begged him to negotiate, "How many before me tried to negotiate and were killed anyway? If my fate is death, then let me at least fall standing." And those words alone were enough to electrify an entire generation. The countdown ticked mercilessly. 14 became 13, then 12. Each sunrise felt like a warning, each sunset like a verdict. The markets in Ouagadougou no longer just sold goods, they became arenas of debate. Elders invoking ancestors, youth rehearsing chants, cafes echoing with speeches replayed on phones. The capital itself transformed into a fortress. Roadblocks manned by soldiers and volunteers. Murals on every street corner with captions like, "We will not kneel," and "Africa is not for sale." Loudspeakers blasting his speeches on repeat until they became the rhythm of daily life. But across the oceans in New York, the atmosphere was different. In the Security Council chamber, diplomats shuffled nervously. Draft resolutions stacked high, arrest warrants already sealed in anticipation. Western ambassadors whispered with confidence, "The world cannot tolerate defiance," while African representatives thundered that the ultimatum was nothing more than colonial arrogance in disguise. And the tension built like thunderclouds on the horizon. The world split into two visions of Traoré: reckless soldier or fearless hero, puppet of instability or symbol of dignity. And with every tick of the clock, that division deepened. Sanctions were prepared, aid packages frozen, military options discreetly reviewed, yet instead of breaking him, it only fed his legend. Because every threat turned into a badge of honor, every condemnation transformed into validation. The man the UN hoped to isolate had become the face of a continent, not because of his power, but because of his refusal to bend. And so as the hours bled away, as the world watched with bated breath, the question that haunted every embassy, every newsroom, every crowded street in Africa was no longer whether Traoré would surrender, but whether the United Nations truly understood what it had unleashed. Whether in demanding the arrest of one man, it had accidentally awoken the spirit of an entire people. And as 12 days remained, the heartbeat of Africa grew louder, not with fear, but with the drumbeat of defiance. Because the ultimatum was no longer simply against a leader, it was against history itself.